I was working at a bookstore in London when an American man in his 30s asked me where the non-fiction section was. I pointed him to it. He browsed for a minute and then came back looking annoyed. He said, "You have books about World War II in the non-fiction section." I said yes, because World War II happened. He said, "Yeah, but some of these books say Britain won the war." I told him Britain was one of the Allied powers that won. He said, "No, America won World War II. Everyone knows that." I explained that it was a joint effort among many countries. He said, "Britain couldn't have won. They're too small." I told him size doesn't determine military capability and that Britain was fighting years before America entered. He said, "We saved you guys. You should be grateful." I said I wasn't alive in 1945, so I personally had nothing to be grateful for. He got huffy and said, "This is revisionist history. I'm reporting this store." I asked who he planned to report it to. He said, "I don't know, but someone needs to know you're spreading misinformation." He left without buying anything. My friend works at a hotel in Barcelona, and she told me about an American couple who checked in and immediately complained that their room had a balcony. She asked what was wrong with the balcony. The wife said, "We didn't ask for a balcony. We're being charged extra for something we don't want." My friend checked their reservation and said there was no extra charge. The balcony came with the room. The husband said, "That doesn't make sense. In America, balconies cost more." My friend explained that in this hotel, most rooms have balconies and it's standard. The wife said, "We want it removed." My friend asked how she was supposed to remove a balcony. The wife said, "I don't know, that's your job. Just take it off the room." My friend tried to explain that balconies are structural features and cannot be removed. The husband said, "So you're forcing us to pay for something we don't want?" My friend repeated that they were not paying extra. He said, "Doesn't matter. It's the principle. We're being given something without consent." They demanded to speak to a manager. The manager told them the same thing. They left a review saying the hotel scammed them with a forced balcony. I was on a train in Switzerland, sitting near an American woman who was on the phone with someone back home. She was explaining how trains work in Europe. She said, "Yeah, they're fast, but they're super dangerous because there are no seatbelts." The person on the other end must have asked a question because she said, "I'm serious." "Nothing. You just sit there and hope the train doesn't crash." She paused and then said, "I know it sounds crazy, but that's how they do things here. They don't care about safety like we do." A Swiss man across from her said, "Trains are statistically safer than cars." She looked at him and said, "That's what they want you to think." He asked who they were. She said, "The train companies. They don't want people to know how unsafe it is." He said, "Millions of people take trains every day without incident." She said, "That's just luck." He gave up. She went back to her phone call and said, "See, even the locals are brainwashed." My cousin teaches at a university in Toronto and had an American student who argued with him about Canadian history. The student insisted that Canada was founded in 1776. My cousin said no, that's when America was founded. Canada became a country in 1867. The student said, "That can't be right. Everyone got independence at the same time." My cousin asked where she learned that. She said, "I just assumed." My cousin showed her a timeline. She looked at it and said, "Okay, but Canada probably wanted to be independent in 1776 and just took longer to do it." My cousin said no, Canadian independence was a completely separate process. She said, "But you were still a British colony, so you must have wanted to rebel like we did." My cousin explained that Canada's path to independence was gradual and peaceful. She said, "That's boring. Why didn't you fight?" My cousin said, "Because we didn't need to." She wrote in her essay that Canada's lack of a revolutionary war showed a failure of national spirit. She was genuinely confused when she got a low grade. I was at a museum in Rome and an American teenager was arguing with a tour guide about the Roman Empire. The guide said the empire lasted for centuries. The kid said, "No, it was like 50 years. The guide said no. The Roman Empire existed for over 1,000 years if you include the Eastern Roman Empire. The kid said, "That's impossible. Empires don't last that long." The guide asked where he learned that. The kid said, "From games. Empires always collapse after a few decades." The guide explained that video games are not accurate historical sources. The kid said, "But they're based on real strategy." The guide gave up and moved on. The kid turned to his dad and said, "I think that guide doesn't know what he's talking about." His dad agreed. They spent the rest of the tour fact-checking the guide with a phone and announcing when they thought he was wrong. They were wrong every time. I worked at a coffee shop in Melbourne and an American man ordered a flat white. I made it and handed it to him. He took a sip and said, "This isn't a flat white." I asked what was wrong with it. He said, "It doesn't taste like Starbucks." I explained that we make flat whites the traditional Australian way. He said, "No, Starbucks invented the flat white." I told him flat whites originated in Australia or New Zealand, depending on who you ask. He said, "That's a myth. Starbucks wouldn't serve something they didn't create." I showed him articles about the history of the flat white. He skimmed one and said, "This is probably funded by Australian tourism." I asked why Australian tourism would lie about coffee. He said, "To seem more important." He left the full cup on the counter and went to find a Starbucks. I was at a pharmacy in Oslo when an American woman tried to buy prescription medication without a prescription. The pharmacist told her she needed to see a doctor first. She said, "I don't need a doctor. I know what I need." The pharmacist explained that it's illegal to dispense prescription medication without a prescription. She said, "In America, I can get this at any pharmacy." The pharmacist said, "This is not America." She got angry and said, "I'm a paying customer. You should give me what I want." The pharmacist stayed calm and repeated that he legally could not. She said, "This is ridiculous. I'm reporting this pharmacy for refusing service." The pharmacist said, "Go ahead." She stormed out. I saw her later at a tourist information centre demanding to know which pharmacies don't follow the law. The person at the desk just stared at her. My brother is a lifeguard at a beach in Portugal, and he told me about an American family who set up right next to a red flag warning area. He went over and told them they couldn't swim there because the currents were dangerous. The dad said, "We're strong swimmers. We'll be fine." My brother explained that the flags are there for a reason, and even strong swimmers can get pulled out. The dad said, "I've been swimming my whole life. I think I know my limits." My brother said, "The ocean doesn't care about your limits." The dad laughed and said, "I'm not afraid of water." His wife backed him up and said, "We're from California. We know beaches." My brother said, "This isn't California. The Atlantic is different." The dad ignored him and started walking toward the water. My brother had to physically block him and threatened to call the police. The dad finally backed off, but spent the rest of the day complaining loudly that European safety regulations were ruining his vacation. I was working at a tourist office in Dublin when an American man came in and asked for a map of Ireland. I gave him one. He looked at it and said, "This is wrong." I asked what was wrong with it. He said, "Ireland is bigger than this." I asked how he knew. He said, "I looked it up before I came. Ireland is one of the biggest countries in Europe." I told him Ireland is actually quite small. He said, "No, I saw a map. It was huge." I realised he probably saw a map where Ireland was enlarged for detail. I tried to explain map projections and scale. He cut me off and said, "I know how to read a map. This one is just inaccurate." He took a picture of it and said he was going to post it online to show how Irish tourism lies to people. I wished him luck with that. My friend is a teacher in South Korea, and she had an American exchange student who insisted that Korea copied its alphabet from English. My friend said no. Hangul was created in the 15th century specifically for the Korean language. The student said, "But some of the letters look like English letters." My friend explained that visual similarity doesn't mean one copied the other. The student said, "It's too much of a coincidence." My friend asked if she thought English invented the concept of letters. The student said, "Kind of, yeah." My friend showed her the history of various writing systems. The student skimmed it and said, Okay, but English is still the original alphabet, my friend said. The Latin alphabet came from Greek, which came from Phoenician, the student said. That's just a theory. My friend gave up. The student went home and told people that Korea wouldn't admit they copied English. I was at a restaurant in Tokyo and an American couple at the next table sent their food back 3 times. The first time, they said the portions were too small. The chef sent out larger portions. They sent it back again and said it was too much. The chef adjusted. They sent it back a 3rd time and said the flavours were too authentic. The waiter asked what that meant. The husband said, "It tastes too Japanese. We want it to taste like the sushi we get at home." The waiter explained that this was a traditional Japanese restaurant in Japan. The wife said, "Right, but you should accommodate different palates." The waiter said they could go to a fusion restaurant if they wanted Americanized food. The husband said, "We shouldn't have to. You're in the service industry." The chef eventually came out and told them to leave. They left a review saying Japanese restaurants in Japan are overrated and don't understand customer service. An American woman in her 40s asked me for directions in Vienna. I gave them to her. She looked at her phone and said, "That's not what Google says." I told her Google Maps can sometimes suggest longer routes. She said, "Google is never wrong." I explained that I live here and know the shortcuts. She said, "Google has satellites. I trust satellites over locals." I said okay and walked away. 10 minutes later, I saw her walking in circles, looking frustrated. She stopped me again and said, "Your directions were wrong. I'm lost." I asked if she followed Google. She said yes. I said, "Then Google got you lost, not me." She said, "Google doesn't make mistakes. I must have entered something wrong." I offered to help again. She declined and said she'd figure it out herself. I saw her an hour later, still wandering around the same area. I was working at a car rental agency in Iceland when an American man insisted he didn't need winter tyres. It was January. I told him winter tyres are required by law during winter months. He said, "I'm from Montana. I know how to drive in snow." I explained that Icelandic winter conditions are different and insurance won't cover him without proper tyres. He said, "This is a scam. You're trying to charge me extra." I showed him the price breakdown. Winter tyres were included, at no additional cost. He said, "Then why are you pushing them?" I said, "Because it's the law, and it's for your safety." He said, "I don't need the government telling me how to drive." He tried to rent from 3 other companies. They all told him the same thing. He came back and begrudgingly accepted the winter tyres, but made sure to tell me he thought it was ridiculous and that Iceland was a nanny state. My sister is a park ranger in Banff, and she said an American hiker got angry with her for telling him he couldn't feed the wildlife. He said, "I'm just giving them snacks. It's not a big deal." She explained that feeding wildlife is illegal and dangerous for both humans and animals. He said, "They look hungry." She told him wild animals know how to find food and don't need help from tourists. He said, "That seems mean. What if they're starving?" She explained that interfering with wildlife disrupts ecosystems. He said, "I think you're being dramatic." She warned him that if he fed any animals, she would fine him. He said, "For being nice? That's insane." She walked away. 20 minutes later, another ranger caught him feeding a squirrel. He tried to argue that squirrels don't count as real wildlife. He got fined. He posted online that Canada punishes compassion. I was at a hospital in Germany visiting a friend when I overheard an American man arguing with a nurse about his bill. He had received emergency treatment the day before. The nurse gave him his bill and he stared at it in disbelief. He said, "This can't be right. Where's the rest of it?" The nurse asked what he meant. He said, "This is only €200. Emergency room visits cost thousands of dollars." The nurse explained that Germany has universal healthcare and costs are much lower. He said, "That's not possible. Medical care is expensive. You're scamming me." The nurse looked confused. He said, "You're gonna charge my credit card later, right? This is just the deposit." She said no, that was the full bill. He didn't believe her. He insisted on speaking to Billing. Billing confirmed the amount. He left the hospital convinced they would send him a real bill later. He waited 6 months for it. It never came. My friend works at a zoo in Singapore, and an American family complained that the animals were fake. My friend asked what they meant. The dad said, "They're too perfect. Real animals don't look like that." My friend assured him the animals were real. The mum said, "The tiger's stripes are too even. It looks painted." My friend explained that tigers naturally have beautiful markings. Their kid said, "The elephant didn't move the whole time we watched. It's probably a robot." My friend said the elephant was resting. The dad said, "We want our money back. We paid to see real animals." My friend took them back to the tiger enclosure. The tiger yawned. The dad said, "That could be animatronic." My friend gave up and refunded them. They left a review saying the Singapore Zoo uses fake animals and is a tourist trap. I was at a train station in Brussels when an American woman asked me how to validate her ticket. I showed her the yellow machine on the platform. She said, "What does that do?" I explained, "It stamps your ticket with the date and time." She said, "Why?" I told her, "It's how they track whether your ticket is valid for that journey." She said, "That's so low tech. In America, everything is digital." I pointed out that her ticket was paper, so it needed a physical validation. She said, "You should upgrade to digital tickets." I told her digital tickets exist, but she bought a paper one. She said, "Because the website was confusing." I said, "Then validate your paper ticket." She said, "This feels like a trap. What if I do it wrong?" I said, "You just insert the ticket and it stamps it." She stared at the machine like it might explode. Finally, she validated it. She looked at the stamp and said, "This seems unreliable." I walked away. An American man at a beach in Thailand asked a vendor why everything was so cheap. The vendor said, "Thailand has lower cost of living." The man said, "Yeah, but this is too cheap. What's the catch?" The vendor said, "There was no catch." The man said, "In America, if something is this cheap, it means it's fake or dangerous." The vendor said, "This is just the normal price here." The man said, "I don't trust it. Raise the price." The vendor looked confused. The man said, "Seriously, I'll pay double. I don't want cheap stuff." The vendor said, "The quality is the same, no matter what you pay." The man insisted on paying more. The vendor eventually accepted extra money just to end the conversation. The man walked away feeling like he had outsmarted a scam. He told his friends he was smart enough not to fall for suspiciously cheap prices. I worked at a bookstore in Stockholm, and an American customer argued with me about the price of a book. She said, "This is 30 kronor. That's too expensive." I told her 30 kronor is about $3. She said, "No, 30 is 30. I explained exchange rates. She said, "That doesn't make sense. Numbers are numbers." I showed her a currency converter on my phone. She said that could be wrong. I asked her how she planned to buy anything in Sweden if she didn't understand the currency. She said, "I'll just use my credit card and deal with it later." I rang up her book. She paid. 2 weeks later, she left an online review saying Swedish bookstores overcharge because $30 for one book is ridiculous. The book cost $3.